Hi all, we're going to continue now our coverage of the French defence, and this is part 2. So in the first part video I did a very brief overview of some example variations, but here I want to zoom in onto the Tarrasch defence, so knight d2. So the Tarrasch was named after the great writer Siegbert Tarrasch, who had running battles with Aaron Nimzowitsch. Their battles were actually ideological in chess. Tarrasch was known as a dogmatic teacher. He had a lot of rules, prescriptive rules, for how the game should be played. And knight d2 was one of his preferred moves against this French defence. And we're going to look here at one particular candidate move in particular, c5, because I'll reserve knight f6 and d takes e4 for other videos. So we're going to look at c5 here. So this is an active plan for black, who's often in many variations here accepting the isolated d-pawn. So what are the two top candidate moves here for white? According to my limited quality database here, e takes d5 is the most popular, followed by knight g f3. D takes c5 is considered a mistake. Let's look at the mistake first. So if you played c5 and the opponent played d takes c5, then you can simply develop your bishop with tempo, and after bishop d3 play knight f6, and now if e5 just knight fd7. Now queen g4 just hitting that g7 pawn. Bishop f8 was played before in one game, but if we have a look at castles here, let's see, knight g f3, f5, and black must be fine here. So this f5 move, if white takes en passant, then black's fine, I think. Let's have a look. E takes f6, knight takes, say queen g5, knight c6, because these pawns can be liberated in the centre. So that's a fine advantage to black position. So let's go back now. So d takes c5 is the most harmless. So the mainline move is e takes d5. So you have to be prepared for e takes d5. So here you can either take with a pawn or queen takes d5. These are the two most popular moves, so you have to recapture with something. So e takes d5. Let's say now two main moves to consider here: knight f3, natural developing move, or bishop b5 check. So knight f3, you can carry on like knight f6, and it could transpose into bishop b5 lines. But let's play something else: bishop e2. So black's got various possibilities here. Let's say knight c6, castles. You can take on d4 here, or you can play bishop e6. There's, in my limited database, 7 games of c takes d4, and after knight b3, bishop e7, and this capturing on centre, this is fine for black. This kind of position. White would have a few reasonable candidate moves though. Say c3, bishop f6, bishop f3, and this is actually a Karpov game from the Norris 1994. This particular variation, but anyway, so after this c5, so bishop e2 is considered inferior statistically to bishop b5 check. So what should you do if bishop b5 check? Bishop d7 is a good move, because let's say knight c6. What's wrong with knight c6? Rybka thinks just castling actually, and here if bishop e7, d takes c5, and it starts to be a bit uncomfortable for black because the king's still in the centre. So actually it's safer after this check just to play bishop d7, and after the exchanges of bishops, castles, bishop e7, and black's fine here. This is perfectly playable. Even though you've got the isolated d-pawn, there's a lot of active possibilities. So say queen d7, and now just castles, bishop f4, rook f8, and black's fine. So c5 is a very interesting move. So in this position, after c5, so bishop b5 check, bishop e2, or d takes c5. Let's explore this a bit further now, this variation. Now here, the game branches are generally split up here after this queen d7 move. So knight 2 to f3, queen f3, knight 2 to b3, or rook e1. Let's have a look actually at queen f3. New variation. Castles. And now here, knight f5 looks a bit dangerous, but bishop d8, knight b3, knight ce4, and black remains active here. Let's have a look earlier now. So instead of queen f3, let's have a look now at knight 2 to b3. You can still play knight ce4. Now f3 would be a slight mistake, giving black quite a lot of success with knight d6. Because after knight c5, queen c7, black's fine. Knight d3, castles, and black has an active position here, despite the isolated pawn. Let's see, there's three main moves which have been played before here. b3, king h1, or bishop f4. Let's have a look at b3, an example, continuation. Rook e8, bishop e3, g6 now, to stop this knight f5. And after queen d2, bishop f8. So this bishop can fianchetto. And this is fine for black. So c5 looks perfectly playable from these lines. In this position here, let's look earlier now. After bishop e7, instead of d takes c5, what happens if white plays rook e1? So a new variation, castles, and now there's a few candidate moves. They can either again take on c5 to transpose into those other lines, but let's have a look at knight f1 as an alternative, rook e8, and now taking, bishop e3, and now here, one of the better statistically successful moves is a5. So you're trying to keep that knight on c5 by stopping white from playing b4. After c3 you can play a4, after a3 knight b3 even, now queen d7, knight a5 rerouting to the c4 square, and black's got a pleasant position, so this is fine for black. In fact, Ribka gives bishop d6 here with a slight advantage. So let's rewind that. So that was the variation with rook e1, castles. There's another alternative here which has been played before, b3. So what would you do here? Rook c8 is a natural move, just threatening to increase the pressure on the c file. And now c4, and black's now got access to this d5 square, so potentially that's going to be useful for black. So this kind of variation is equal for black as well, or roughly equal. Queen d7 now, or a6 is a good move. And after knight g3 you can play the move f6 is recommended by Ribka to stop that knight coming to e5, and then you can continue with things like queen d6. So that's fine for black. So let's have a quick rewind here. So we're saying that in the Tarrasch variation of the French defence, c5 is an active move. So we've looked at three main candidate moves here. E takes d5, and knight gf3 and d takes c5. Knight gf3. So the main moves here: knight c6, c takes d4, knight f6, or a6 even. Let's have a look at knight c6 here. E takes, bishop b5. I would transpose into stuff we've discussed. Let's have a look at c3 though. That seems a bit more passive. According to Ribka, c takes d4 might be okay, but let's say we want to avoid this isolated pawn situation. c4 has been played in the master game before, and now bishop d6, knight f6, knight f1 here. Now h6, so stopping that pin on g5, rook e8, and black's fine here in this kind of position. This bishop coming here can now support queen d6. Ribka actually recommends, in fact, the move bishop d7 here, or knight a5. Knight a5 is also interesting, but bishop d7, what would be the idea behind that? Knight e3, and now knight a5. So black's targeting white's queen side and this a pawn. So that's fine for black as well. So this was a very brief overview of some of the C5 lines, and it really needs more detail on a particular line so we can get more insight if we can just focus in further. But this was just the part 2 video for this Tarrasch variation with C5. I hope there's something instructive in there. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.